A quiet diner morning takes a sharp turn when a young woman witnesses her father, a humble elderly man, being disrespected by those meant to serve him. A moment that will shake the room and reveal a truth no one saw coming. The clatter of dishes and hum of quiet conversations couldn't mask the tension that thickened with each passing minute. The young woman's gaze burned with determination as she watched her father, seated silently and unnoticed, endure the humiliation of being ignored. "Why hasn't he been served?" she demanded, her voice calm but unwavering, cutting through the room like a blade. Her words silenced the patrons, who now shifted uncomfortably, realizing their own complicity in the injustice unfolding before them. What followed was not just a confrontation but a reckoning, a moment that would reveal shocking truths, challenge values, and leave everyone questioning their own role in the world they've created. Would the lesson be learned, or would silence prevail? Before we journey further into this unforgettable story, make sure you're subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Hit that bell icon now so you never miss an incredible tale. Join our community by liking, sharing, and commenting to keep these heartwarming stories coming. And hey, tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you all. The golden morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows of a small, quaint diner nestled on the bustling main street of Monterey, California. Inside, the comforting aroma of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee intertwined with the warm hum of casual conversations. This diner wasn't just a place to eat. It was the heart of the community, where everyone seemed to know each other by name, their lives stitched together by shared greetings and familiar orders. At one of the corner booths, a group of regulars chatted animatedly, flipping through newspapers as a toddler's laughter echoed softly from another table. It was a Tuesday morning, seemingly like any other, until the door creaked open and the world inside shifted. A hush fell over the room as an elderly black man stepped inside. His presence was understated yet commanding. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit with a neatly knotted tie, he walked with the assistance of a cane, his posture slightly bent but dignified. His polished shoes reflected the sunlight streaming in, and his eyes carried a quiet wisdom as they scanned the room. He exuded a sense of purpose, yet his movements were humble, as though he had long been accustomed to blending into the background. The air grew thick with unspoken tension as he made his way to an empty corner booth. A subtle ripple of discomfort passed through the patrons. A woman paused mid-sip of her coffee, a group of men at the counter exchanged furtive glances, and even the cheerful chatter dulled. It wasn't hostility, exactly, but a silent unease that seemed to cling to the walls, like an unwelcome guest. The waitress, a young woman with blonde hair tied in a loose ponytail, moved briskly through the diner, balancing trays and refilling coffee cups. She was a familiar face to the regulars, her laugh often ringing out louder than the diner's music. But when her eyes fell on the elderly man, her demeanor changed. She stiffened, her smile faded, and instead of approaching his table, she turned sharply toward the counter. The elderly man sat quietly, his hands folded neatly on the table. Every now and then, he glanced at the laminated menu, though it was clear he had already decided on his order. He raised his hand politely to signal the waitress, his gesture calm and respectful. Yet, she pretended not to see him, pouring coffee for another table before retreating to the kitchen. At a nearby table, a middle-aged woman frowned, her gaze darting between the man and the waitress. Her lips parted as though she might speak, but instead, she lowered her eyes, tapping distractedly at her phone. A young couple whispered to each other, their words too soft to hear, but they avoided looking in his direction altogether. Minutes stretched into an uncomfortable eternity. The man's calm remained unshaken, but the tension in the room was palpable, like a storm cloud ready to burst. He adjusted his glasses and raised his hand once more, holding it in the air for several moments. But the waitress passed by again, her tray balanced with practiced ease, her gaze deliberately averted. A teenage busboy, standing near the kitchen door with a tray of dishes, watched the scene unfold with knitted brows. "That guy's been waiting a while. He murmured to the waitress as she passed by. "I'll get to him," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to end the conversation. The elderly man shifted slightly in his seat, his shoulders dipping just a fraction. It wasn't defeat. His posture still held an air of quiet dignity, but it was clear he felt the weight of the situation. Still, he refused to cause a scene. His patience was steadfast, though the whispers around him grew louder. And then, as if on cue, the door swung open, the bell above it jingling like a sharp blade slicing through the tension. A woman in her early 30s strode in, her heels clicking against the tiled floor with determined confidence. She was striking, with an aura of elegance and authority that demanded attention. Her tailored blazer and perfectly styled hair hinted at a successful life, but it was her piercing gaze that truly silenced the room. Her eyes swept across the diner, before landing on the man in the corner booth. Her expression transformed, lighting up with recognition and warmth. "Dad," she called out, her voice clear and filled with affection. The elderly man's face softened instantly, a broad smile spreading across his features. He stood, his movements slow but purposeful, and opened his arms to embrace her tightly. For a moment, the room was suspended in silence, every patron frozen in place, their discomfort now replaced by stunned curiosity. The woman pulled back, her expression shifting from joy to concern as her sharp eyes darted to the empty table before him. "You haven't been served yet?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. The man hesitated, his gaze briefly meeting hers before he answered, "Not yet." His tone was calm, almost forgiving, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The woman straightened, her jaw tightening. She turned toward the waitress, who had been frozen mid-pour at another table, her hand trembling. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her voice cutting through the diner like a blade. The waitress turned slowly, her face pale as the room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for what would come next. The young woman's voice resonated through the diner, a quiet storm in the making. "Yes," she said, her tone sharp as a blade yet controlled. "My father's been sitting here for nearly an hour. Why hasn't he been served?" Her words cut through the uneasy chatter like a lightning bolt. The waitress flinched, her composure unraveling under the intense scrutiny. "I was just about to get to him," she stammered, her gaze darting toward the kitchen, as if salvation might emerge from behind the swinging doors. "Really?" The young woman's eyes narrowed, her glare unyielding. "Because it sure looks like you've been deliberately ignoring him." The waitress's face flushed a deep crimson as her hands fumbled with the coffee pot. "It's been busy. I didn't mean to." "Don't lie to me." The young woman's voice was steel wrapped in velvet, firm yet devastating. "Everyone here saw what happened. You had no problem serving every other table." Murmurs rippled across the room like the rising tide. A few patrons nodded, their earlier discomfort now transforming into quiet agreement. The tension was no longer just a silent judgment. It was an active reckoning. The young woman turned back to her father, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry, Dad. You shouldn't have had to deal with this." The elderly man smiled, his weathered face radiating quiet dignity. "It's all right," he said gently, though the glimmer of hurt in his eyes told another story. But his daughter wasn't done. She straightened, her presence commanding every soul in the room. Her voice, calm but brimming with authority, silenced even the faintest whispers. "Let me make one thing clear," she began, each word a dagger aimed directly at the waitress. The room seemed to freeze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Coffee cups lingered in midair, and every gaze locked onto the young woman. "That man you ignored for the past hour?" She took a deliberate step forward, her tone now ice-cold. "He's not just a customer. He's my father. And I own this restaurant." The air left the room in a collective gasp. Shock rippled through the diner like an earthquake, and the weight of her revelation settled heavily over everyone. The waitress's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing as if words might come to her rescue. You own the place?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's right," the young woman replied without hesitation. "I built this business from the ground up, pouring my heart and soul into making it a space where everyone feels welcome. And today, you disrespected not only my father, but everything this restaurant stands for." The waitress took an unsteady step backward, clutching the coffee pot as though it might anchor her to reality. "I didn't mean to. You just what?" The young woman snapped, her voice rising, anger crackling at the edges. "Thought you could decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. Thought no one would notice." She gestured sharply to the room. Well, everyone noticed. The patrons squirmed uncomfortably in their seats, their shame now as palpable as the silence. A man at the counter cleared his throat, his voice awkward and hesitant. I didn't want to get involved," he mumbled, staring into his coffee like it held the answer. The young woman turned her piercing gaze toward him and then swept it across the room. "Silence is complicity," she said, her voice softer now but no less powerful. "When you see something wrong and say nothing, you become part of the problem." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving, cutting through the heavy quiet. Some patrons nodded subtly, others avoided her gaze entirely. Her message had struck its mark. The elderly man reached for his daughter's arm, his touch light but grounding. "Let it go, sweetheart," he murmured. "They've heard enough." She turned to him, her face softening again. "Dad, you deserve better. This shouldn't have happened." He smiled, the quiet strength in his expression unmistakable. "I know, but the lesson has been learned." The waitress, now visibly trembling, stammered, "I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. Please, I'll do better." The young woman stared at her, a long, piercing gaze that seemed to assess her very soul. Finally, she gave a curt nod. "You'll have the chance to prove it. But let me be clear. If I ever see anything like this again, you're done." The weight of her words pressed down on the room like a physical force. The waitress nodded shakily, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The young woman took a step back, her father's hand slipping into hers. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a lingering sense of accountability. For the first time in a long while, it felt like a reckoning had truly unfolded. The two walked toward the door together, the elderly man's posture upright and proud beside his daughter's unwavering stride. As they exited the diner, the bell above the door jingled softly, its sound a stark contrast to the storm they left behind, a storm that had irrevocably changed everyone inside. The young woman scanned the room one last time, her gaze unyielding yet calm, as she addressed everyone present. This restaurant wasn't just built to serve food, she began, her voice steady, carrying both authority and warmth. It was built on the foundation of respect, kindness, and dignity, values that transcend business. Every person who steps through those doors deserves to be treated with decency. No exceptions. Her words lingered in the air, a poignant reminder that reached even the most reluctant ears. The waitress, now standing stiffly near the counter, nodded earnestly, her face a mix of regret and determination. "I promise," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll make it right. I'll apologize to him properly." The young woman tilted her head slightly, her expression soft but firm. "You'll do more than that," she replied. "Reflect on why you acted the way you did today. Understand the bias that led to this moment, and make sure it never happens again. I'm giving you this chance because I believe people can change, but the responsibility to prove that lies with you." The waitress swallowed hard, her shame evident, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I understand. Thank you," she whispered. The young woman turned back to her father, her expression softening as she met his gaze. "Let's get you that breakfast you came here for," she said gently, but he shook his head with a quiet chuckle. "I think I've lost my appetite for eggs and bacon," he said, his voice light yet tinged with exhaustion. "Let's go home, sweetheart." As they began to make their way toward the door, a hesitant voice broke the silence. A woman seated in the far corner of the diner stood, her movements tentative. "Ma'am," she called, her voice wavering. I want to apologize. I saw what was happening, and I didn't say anything. I should have spoken up. It wasn't right to just sit and watch." The elderly man stopped and turned to her, his smile gentle, his eyes filled with understanding. "Acknowledging it now is a start," he said. "But next time, don't hesitate. Speak up. You might make all the difference." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room as other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, nodding in silent agreement. The once tense atmosphere was beginning to transform, the weight of guilt replaced with a resolve to do better. Faces that had been passive observers now bore the marks of reflection and determination. At the door, the young woman paused beside the waitress. Her voice dropped to a quiet but resolute tone. "I expect better from you, not just for my father, but for everyone who walks through those doors." The waitress lowered her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. I won't let you down." Father and daughter stepped out into the crisp morning sunlight. The elderly man leaned on his cane, taking a deep breath as the warmth of the day touched his face. "You've become a remarkable woman," he said, pride evident in his tone. The young woman smiled, her heart full. "I learned from the best, Dad," she replied, her voice laced with affection. They walked down the bustling street together, their steps perfectly in sync, leaving behind the diner and the echoes of an unforgettable moment. The elderly man tapped his cane lightly against the pavement and spoke thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes moments like this to remind people of what truly matters." His daughter nodded. "You're right, Dad. People need to understand that their actions or their silence have consequences. If no one speaks up, nothing ever changes." He looked at her with quiet wisdom, his smile warm and reassuring. "And today, you made sure they heard that loud and clear, not just for me, but for everyone in that room." Inside the diner, the lesson lingered, imprinted on the hearts of those who had witnessed the scene. The patrons sat in quiet reflection, some reevaluating their own choices, others silently vowing to act differently in the future. A place once filled with routine now bore the weight of a meaningful transformation. As father and daughter walked away, their bond stronger than ever, the story of what had transpired left a lasting impact. It was a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the refusal to stay silent in the face of injustice. What would you have done in that diner? Would you have spoken up or looked away? This story is a reminder that dignity and respect are not optional. They are fundamental. When you witness something wrong, don't stay silent. Speak up. Your voice could be the one that sparks change. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can build a world where kindness and justice prevail, one story at a time. This story teaches us that standing up for what's right can inspire change, even in the smallest moments. Let it be a reminder to treat everyone with dignity and never remain silent in the face of injustice. If the story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to help spread its powerful message. Together, we can make a difference.